But a more leisurely look at this, I would not suggest anybody try to digest this in one sitting. It didn't take one sitting to pull it all together, I can assure you of that. And little by little work your way through some of the complexities of this. We think this document, beyond our own focus, which is health, social services, and economic opportunity, provides a pretty good backdrop to what's going on with the state budget, short term and long term. Several general thoughts before just doing a quick walkthrough of what is in here and what some of those numbers look like. Our approach to this was basically as follows. We think that it's necessary that the state of Ohio in the next biennium take a balanced approach to addressing the budget shortfall, and that involves basically three different approaches. One, additional revenue. Two, reducing tax expenditures. Those are taxes that are not collected. I'll say more about that in just a moment. And then third, reducing programmatic expenditures. We look at where the opportunities may be in those areas as we go through the document, but throughout you'll hear this theme about a balanced approach being essential. That's true, and we come to that conclusion for a couple other reasons that are sort of backdrop to the rest of the document. One of those is that whatever is going on in our economy is unprecedented. We don't pretend to understand the dynamics of the economic crisis that we're in. We also think that whether you're politically left or politically right, it's unlikely that you've got a good handle on what it is that we are involved in part because of the displacement of manufacturing to parts like the industrial Midwest, to other parts of the world, the emergence and growth of the service sector for many, many years, and now this sort of dearth of activity that is not producing public revenue that we're used to, year after year, seeing an uptick of several percent. We could be wrong about that. Maybe we're just going to come bouncing out of this. But from the time that we wrote this report several months ago to the present time, our assumptions about what the revenue picture is likely to be in Columbus in a couple of the next 2 years has changed significantly, because what looked like a relatively decent recovery in May now looks like it's flagging and leveling off, and some of the revenue projections that we've made in here may not in fact occur. A couple of other basic things behind the document as a whole. One is that we believe that moderation and tone is extremely important, that neither the political left nor the political right have a monopoly on good ideas here, that we've got to find some common ground, and most importantly be practical about this for a 2-year period. This is the real deal. This isn't some imagined number, the way Congress works with budgets, where it's all basically imagined. The deficit is imagined. We print paper based upon imaginary projections of what trillion-dollar deficits are going to look like in 20 years and things like that. That's all fiction. Ohio has to balance its budget the next 2 years. It has to take in enough money to pay its bills. So with those thoughts in mind, we began first to define where are we. Several months ago, the best you could do in saying what is this $8 billion shortfall was, well, we've got about $8 billion or so in one-time money or one-time savings represented in the current biennial budget. So is that a good way to get to $8 billion? In fact, it's a terrible way to get to the number because it really doesn't tell you what's going on the revenue and expense side. We took fiscal 2011 numbers. This you'll find on pages 2 and 3, and I'll just start walking you through here. And for those who are listening to this at home, you can download this document at communitysolutions.com. If you look at, pages 3 and 4, we get about defining a baseline as follows. We take fiscal 11 revenue, fiscal 11 expenses. We inflate the revenue, making some assumptions about improvement in the economy. That is described there, and we make a big adjustment on the spending side for Medicaid because federal Medicaid match is declining significantly at the end of the current fiscal year. And then we come up with what looks like a structural shortfall of $3.5 to $4.5 billion. It's probably a bit more than that because we make some optimistic revenue assumptions. There are then several things, though, that go into the picture that require us to adjust the picture And these are important things to know about. You'll see these on pages 5 through 7. One, revenue from the commercial activity tax that was enacted 5 years ago is pledged currently to keeping local political subdivisions and school districts whole when on the repeal of the tangible personal property tax that accompanied that. The CAT tax is not yielding enough money to do that. It's showing it's producing several $100 million less than is necessary, so the general fund is going to have to cover a portion of that hole for the next couple of years. Unemployment trust fund for the state of Ohio is about $3 billion in debt to the federal government. This is off the books of the general fund. The state of Ohio will have to start paying debt on that debt beginning in October of 2011. That's over $100 million a year in the next biennium that's currently not being incurred. There are several other things that we talk about in there. Among them, very importantly, is Medicaid growth. It is impossible to consider that the Medicaid program, $16 billion and counting per year, is not going to grow in the next biennium. We look at the federal actuaries' data on that and our experience the last few years, and we would say in a typical year that needs to be inflated by 7.5% per year. 7.5% of $16 billion compounding is a big number. When you throw all of those things in, we come up then on pages 7 and 8 with an estimate of a shortfall in the range of $6 to $7 billion. It's probably, given our optimistic revenue projections, more in the $6.5 to $7.5 billion range, at least the way we see the world. We then provide for several pages, say through page 11 or so, an overview of Ohio taxes. And I want to just say a couple things about this, a couple important things to note. Number one, you've heard for years that Ohio is a low tax state, usually from the left. And if you look at state taxes, we're 35th or 38th in taxes per capita, taxes per $1,000 of income for what's collected at the state level. However, when you throw in local governments, we end up around number 10, give or take, depending on who's doing it. And this is because of a couple of things. We have relied for many years on moving tax obligations and creating all sorts of special purpose and more customary taxing capacity at the local level. We're one of only about 4 states that authorize municipalities to have an income tax. Most people don't know that. Most people don't know that businesses pay the municipal income tax the same as people do. Those are issues that need to get worked out in the budget process because the state also, to a very significant extent, subsidizes local governments through the local government fund, which is about $1 billion a year to cities and counties, and another almost $2 billion a year that we spend in property tax rollbacks that go back to local government that people don't even know are there. So, are we a high tax state or a low tax state? The answer is yes. When people on the left say low and the people on the other say high, it's yes to both. And what we really need to do is cut through that baloney and get to some of these very difficult issues underneath. And this is something that requires people of all political stripes to be thinking in a common direction. What kind of solutions do we have? In addition to that, on the individual tax data, everybody knows that the upper 20%, the last 25 years or so, has done well. The bottom 80% of families in the United States have seen real income stagnate for several decades. This is not new information, but what we do point out here is, number one, that as that has happened in terms of federal tax obligation, that upper 20% is now paying over 70% of federal taxes. That's not the way it was when I took Economics 101. And secondly, that bottom 80% in Ohio is stagnating at lower levels. In other words, Ohio families' incomes have stagnated at lower levels than they have nationally. The result of that being, among other things, this tremendous resistance that we all know is there with regard to increasing taxes. After discussing the tax situation, or one other thing I should mention on taxes, and I do want to cut to the chase here, and I'm taking too long, but it is important to note too that businesses' contribution to Ohio's taxes over the course of the last 30 years has declined.